Hi everyone, it's Tonya Gibbs, and today I want to share with you a layout tutorial featuring products from Fern Studios. I am going to use their beautiful love story collection today. This is the Amazing Heart paper. We're going to use the side that is black, and then I'm also going to use a few of these calling card cut apart pieces for my journaling spots. And then I'm also going to use this beautiful stamp set. This is from their autumn collection. This is the Essential Textures. I'm going to use that brick stamp, and also the Paisley and Vine chipboard pieces today. I'm going to start by adding some gel medium from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft at the center of my paper here. And this is a piece of tissue paper that came from the gift wrap section of a department store. It is got a really neat print on it. It's a vintage newspaper print, but it's in French, which is really quite interesting and will match the pattern in the paper really well. Notice I'm not adding gel medium completely everywhere because I am going to come back once this is dry and rip around the edges and curl those up to give those edges some interest and some texture. Now I'm going to take the calling card page and I'm going to go ahead and fussy cut out this section and use it as a frame for my photo. And I'm just going to carefully go around the lacy border that is here in this pattern until I have it completely cut out. Then I'm going to add a little bit of the tea dye distress ink around the edges just to give it a little more vintage look and to hide the white core of the paper. This is a photo of my niece, Austin, and she is going to be the star of today's layout. And I've decided to print this photograph in black and white because I think it's really going to bring the black up from the bottom, and it's with all of the soft, muted pinks and taupe colors, her black and white photo is really going to pop off of this layout. So once I get the photo placed there, I'm going to put that to the side. This is a die from Cherry Lynn Designs, and I have just cut it out of some scrap paper, and now I'm distressing it up with some of the tea dye distress ink. I'm adding water to the sponge so that and then blotting it down so that I don't have to scrub across that dye. That way it preserves those delicate pieces. Now I'm going to come back and add some of that tea dye to my tissue paper as well. It's good and dry now. The gel medium has had a chance to really dry, and notice where I did not add gel medium to the edges, it's really lifting up and curling, which is the look I'm after. Now I've added a little bit of Lindy Stamp Gang. This is the Trace Chic collection, and it is the Cafe Latte as well as the Chateau Rose. I just added a little mixture of those, and you can see how it really adds a nice vintage look. So now I'm going to go back to my calling cards page and pull out another one of the journaling spots and go ahead and fussy cut out around that. And now it's time to add a little bit of texture to my chipboard. So these pieces are so intricate and beautiful, just absolutely gorgeous, but since they do have such a flat surface, I want to go ahead and add some texture to them. I'm using Prima's textural paste in the white crackle and adding it very liberally around this entire chipboard piece on both of these pieces. I'm going to lay that to the side and let it dry and go ahead and prep some of my other pieces. These are lace doilies that I just cut apart. They came in one strip on a piece of lace, and I just cut them apart. I'm adding a little bit of that Chateau Rose from Lindy Stamp Gang there in the center. This is a Lemore Weber Designs signature color. And then now I'm coming back with a Lindy Stamp Gang Rudolph's Red Nose, and I'm coloring up a little bit of this organza rose trim that is from Maya Road. That's going to give me that nice soft rich rose color that is in the paper collection. And this is just a piece of scrap lace that was in my bucket of one hit wonders that you guys see me dig in all the time. And to give it a nice vintage look, I'm just scrubbing some of that tea dye stain across there as well. So now I'm going to add a little bit more of that tissue paper to this journaling spot just to give that little center area there a little texture. I'm just going to use some of that gel medium from Faber-Castell Design Memory Craft to add that down. Once the gel medium has had a chance to dry, I'm going to use some Versamark ink and that Essentials texture stamp and stamp the brick onto my little journal spot here, and use some white embossing powder to add that texture to this little journal spot. And I absolutely love this. It's going to be so fun on my layout. So once I get all of that embossing powder in place, I'm going to heat set that, and it's going to give a really nice raised finish to this journal spot. Now I'm going to come back with that tea dye distress ink and just buff that around just to kind of darken it up and distress it up a little bit, and then using a baby wipe I'm going to brush some of that tea stain off of the top of my enamel that I just embossed. And now I'm going to repeat this onto the background of my layout just to give a little bit of interest in those negative places around where my photograph is going to rest. And again, just going all the way around that tissue paper with this Versa ink. I'm not being terribly careful about placement here. Some of these areas may overlap a little bit, and that's okay if it does, or I may miss a couple of spaces here and there. Remember, I'm going to have embellishment clusters in this area as well, so some of this is going to get hidden behind all of those areas, and if you look at a brick wall, sometimes they're not consistent, you know, as well. So I love the grungy look of this. I love the distressed look of it as well. So I'm not going to stress it too much if everything's not lined up perfectly. Now my chipboard has had a chance to dry and it's crackled really nicely. So I'm going to come back and add some pigment to the top of my flowers. I'm just using that Rudolph's Red Nose from Lindy Stamp Gang to color up my flowers, and then I've also pulled out Lindy Stamp Gang Idlewise Moss Green to color up the leaves. Now since this textural paste has a little bit of a silicone type finish to it, it is making my pigments a little lighter than what I was expecting, but I'm not going to worry about that at this stage. I'm going to just keep applying color and layers, and then I decided to just vintage this entire thing up by adding a little bit of that distress ink as well. The distress ink is going to mix into all of those little crevices of the crackle and really help for that texture to pop. So I've decided to take advantage of that full doily instead of hiding it behind my embellishment cluster and breaking it apart to add it to my layout. This is another one of those little pieces that are on the cut apart page. It says sweet, so I've just taken my scissors to rough it up, and now I'm going to add a little bit of that tea dye distress ink as well to the edges of it, and that's going to rest to the right of my photograph. And this paper collection is so yummy, like it's so beautiful. And also just note that this paper is also a really nice sturdy thick cardstock, so it's holding these mediums so well. I've had very little buckling on here. Now I haven't added a lot of wet medium to this, but I don't believe I will have any trouble at all with wet mediums with this paper. It's so thick. So now it's time to start building out my embellishment clusters. And I've placed my lace there at the base, and then I'm going to put my journal spot on top of that. I decided that my photograph needed to have a little more elevation, so I'm just using some scrap pieces of chipboard to apply to the back. I've done this in 2 layers, and that really did help to lift it up so that I can tuck some things in and around. I'm also adding a piece of that doily that I cut apart, that lace applique I cut apart 2 of the petals off of at the base of that sweet label, and also placed one of the organza flowers there. And don't be afraid to cut apart your chipboard pieces too to make them fit and do what you need them to do. So like I cut off that one leaf there, and I'm tucking it in under the sweet embellishment cluster, and then I'm going to place this larger piece on top. So that's going to give it a little depth, and it's also going to maximize my chipboard pieces a little more. And just to add a little bit of texture down below, I'm adding the rest of that little lace applique below the chipboard. To elevate up the center pieces of these chipboards, I've pulled them apart and then added a large amount of hot glue to the center and then rested the tops on top so that it looks like it's got a really nice depth of field. And then I'm just going to add a few little flowers there. I'm not sure who makes these flowers, but they're really pretty lily looking flowers, and they're very soft and very small, so they don't compete too much with the chipboard pieces. So again, this time I'm going to add chipboard to the back of the journal piece, but I'm only going to add one level, so my photograph is still higher than any other element on the page. So here's another one of those little flowers that I'm going to add there next to my photograph, and just continue to build that out. I love the overall softness of this layout, and I love the fact that none of the embellishments really compete with one another, and the organza is so lightweight, but it pulls in the rich red tones from the roses that are in the paper design, as well as the the appliques, or adding that nice flower touch without a lot of depth. This layout is predominantly very flat. There's a little bit of elevation to it, but for the most part it's very flat, so it would still fit in your page protectors really nicely. And the chipboard pieces are not overwhelming or too bulky in this layout, so I really like that they are taking center stage rather than a big cluster of thick flowers. And again, whenever you see the photos of up close of the finished layout, you'll really be able to see all of the texture. And I think that the texture is going to add all of the drama to this layout as well. So don't forget that sometimes it's those little tiny details that add the punch, and you don't have to overdo it. And I think that's what I really like about this layout, is it's one of those where there are a lot of details and a lot of really feminine accents, but it's not overdone. So for those of you who are unfamiliar with how to build out these embellishment cluster layers, what I typically like to do is to start out with my biggest elements first. Notice I started with the journaling page, and then I started with the big bulky chipboard pieces, and then I've come back and added some of my medium size pieces like the appliques and the organza trim, and then I come back with the smaller pieces and add a few details here and there to kind of seal in some of those transitional areas that left gaps between the bigger elements. That's just how I do it. I like the way it all kind of comes together, and it gives you a little bit of interest and keeps your eye flowing around. I also try to maintain a certain degree of symmetry, so if you see I do something to one side, I typically try to do it to the other side. Here I am going to add some more black. This is just going to help to ground all of those elements and help that background come back up to the top. And all I'm doing is adding a few of the Tim Holtz rub-ons to do that. So now I've decided to soften this up just a bit on that left-hand side. So I'm taking a piece of seam binding, I'm going to make a bow and add one of these little edges of a tag here. The tag and the seam binding were colored with the Lindy Stamp Gang Chateau Rose from the Trace Chic collection. This is a Lemar Weber Designs signature color. So I'm just going to make a quick little loopy bow there, tie it off with one of the wire stems that were left over from the flowers that I used, and tuck that into that tag. And then I'm going to use a piece of masking tape across the back of that piece of wire just to make sure that it stays in place, and then I'm going to tuck it in at the edge of that journal spot that I left there. So it just kind of helps to soften up that edge over on the left. I really wasn't happy with the transition between the tissue paper and the brick. And I think you can still see all of those elements, but I think the seam binding kind of helps to give it a softness. Now, this is where I realized that the flowers just did not have enough pop to me. So I'm coming back with a gold wink of Stella and adding that over the center of those flowers. And now I'm coming back with the sidewalk chalk Lindy Stamp Gang from Lamar Weber Designs. This is from the Neon Graffiti collection, and I'm just going to add a few white splatters just around the layout, and that's going to kind of help to draw your eye back up to the embellishment cluster. I want to make sure that those are really good and dry before I go on, because I don't want to smear them. And now I'm going to come back with a few more of those rub-ons. These are just some leaf patterns, and again, the black is just going to help to just give a little bit of weight to that top, and then and just anchor everything down and give it a little bit of I don't know, weight to just kind of send it back to the bottom. So that one butterfly was a little bit too bulky, so I cut it in half, and I think I'm going to place it over on this side in this little embellishment cluster, like it's resting on top of the flowers. And then of course I have the little one there in the center, and then I'm going to place this one up on the right. So I have three around my framing around my photo. So now I've decided that I need some metal accents. So I noticed inside of the patterns on the paper collection there is a key and also a crown and a heart. So I've decided to, and an arrow, use some gesso and color up all of these elements. The key, I believe, is an old Tattered Angels, really old. The arrow is from Tim Holtz, and of course I think the crown and the heart are also from Tim Holtz. And all I'm doing is adding gesso because all of them were a different color, and this gesso is going to help them to kind of all look like they belong together and give them a nice patinaed look. So now I'm going to take some of this gel medium and add it to the back of these elements, but to get them to go ahead and stick, I'm also going to add just a spot of hot glue here and there until that gel medium has a chance to dry. The hot glue will hold it in place. And so I'm going to start out with this arrow and the crown, and I'm going to place it inside of this area, and the arrow is going to point back to my photograph. And then I'm going to add the key as if it's dropping down on the right hand side, and I just love the way this looks. Absolutely love it. It was that one little element that was missing. So of course lately you guys have seen me do this quite a bit. I'm taking some glossy accents, and this is an excellent thing to do if you have that bottle of glossy accents where the nib is just misbehaved enough to where it's all gummed up. Pour it into a cup, throw some of that German glass glitter down into that cup, and then use a popsicle stick to spread that around your layout. I've also added a few clear glass beads there, and I'm being very careful to add it to the shadowed areas underneath my embellishment clusters. And what that's going to do is add a little bit of light into those darker areas and really help to add a sophisticated sparkle to this layout without it being, like I said, overdone. I didn't want a lot of splatters. I didn't want a lot of super shiny elements. I really wanted my photograph to be center stage, but I felt that with this being a little girl, it was taking on way too much of a vintage look. I wanted to add some of that glittery sparkle to this, so I felt like this was a great way to do it without overdoing it. And then of course I'm adding a little small rhinestone there to the top of the crown. So here's the close-up photo. You can really see the texture on those chipboard pieces, and the texture in the background with all of the layers. There's the finished layout. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with me today through this process video. I hope I've taught you a few new techniques, and you've had a lot of fun hanging out with me today. And of course, if you have and you enjoy this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button that's down there underneath, and leave me a comment, a thumbs up, and don't forget to share this video with a friend.